APUSH. Today we are going to continue talking a little bit more about the Vietnam War. We introduced it yesterday and we kind of talked about how it got started, how the United States became involved in Vietnam and that surrounding region, in the first place, right? Which dated all the way back to decolonization and that post-World War II era. We talked about how eventually money became troops with the Kennedy administration, and then how the Gulf of Tonkin resolution not only starts the Vietnam War, but also kind of expands the power of the presidency, giving LBJ kind of a green light or a blank check to start a war without Congress's actual declaration, constitutional declaration of war. So that's kind of a summary of what we did yesterday. Today we're going to build on that and kind of talk about how the war kind of evolves or transforms and kind of that middle section of the war. And then next week we'll finish it up when we talk about Richard Nixon and a little bit more about the 1970s. So this is your, what did I title this? Vietnam at Home and Abroad lecture, something like that. You'll find it in your folder. Anyways, okay. So first we want to talk about what's our strategy. Okay, what's our strategy and what is the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese strategy, because when we're talking about the Viet Cong, this is our enemy. This is technically who we're fighting, and remember, they are represented by North Vietnam, but you also have pockets of Viet Cong throughout the South trying to destabilize that region, okay? So we're fighting largely in the South against the Viet Cong pockets, but also against largely the North, which is funding the Viet Cong and kind of the communist center of the country, okay? So that's kind of just to define our terms. But anyways, the American strategy going into this thing is that we are going to Americanize it, okay? Because technically, right, this is a war between the North and the South, right? North Vietnam versus South Vietnam, okay? And so the general belief at the beginning of this thing is that if we leave the South Vietnamese to fend for themselves, if they have to fight this war with just their own army and with their own resources and their own technology without American intervention, then they're going to lose, okay? Because they're just not equipped to handle this war against the North Vietnamese, okay? So that's the prevailing belief. And so because of that belief, America believes that they need to Americanize the conflict, meaning that it's going to be fought with American troops, American resources, and American cash, okay, American money. And so that's simply what it means. We are the ones, America is going to be the one kind of leading the way in this fight against North Vietnam, okay? So from March 1965 to March 1973, we start launching airstrikes, okay? And that kind of brings us more into our strategy. Not only are we going to Americanize the war effort, really what that's going to boil down to is three different methods, okay? Three different strategies in order to fight and win this war. The first one that I just alluded to was through airstrikes, and I start with this one because it's our preferred method of fighting this war, okay? It is amazing to think about how many bombs we drop on Vietnam, okay? We drop a total of about, actually it's more, it's like 6 million tons of bombs, okay? 6 million tons of bombs on North Vietnamese camps and bases. Now I want you to think about this for a second, okay? North Vietnam is half of an already really small country. So let's say this is Vietnam, okay? We are dropping 6 million tons of bombs on this much of it. So like a really, really small country, and take half of that and then dump 6 million bombs into it, okay? Now this number, this 6 million tons number, okay? This is 3 times the amount of bombs that was dropped in all of World War II by all the countries involved in World War II. Okay, let me rephrase that a little bit. If you take the number of bombs that we dropped in Vietnam, okay, that's 6 million tons, that is 3 times more than the total number of bombs that were dropped in all of World War II by every country that fought in that war. So that's England, US, Germany, Italy, Russia. I mean, so many countries fought in World War II. All of their bombs in World War II between 1939 and 1945 is still a third of what was dropped in just Vietnam by the United States, okay? Astronomical number, okay? So we definitely prefer airstrikes in Vietnam, okay? The strategy is through chemical warfare. Now, this one is tricky, okay, because we are not doing what like the Germans did in World War I per se. We're not, using mustard gas with the intent of killing people. Okay, that wasn't the intent. We use two different types of chemical weapons in Vietnam. Okay, the first one is called napalm. It's this like jellied gasoline, so it's gas, but it's kind of like in a jelly form, and we dropped it from our airplanes. So you would have airplanes that would go, across the jungles in the sky, and they would drop napalm on the trees, okay? And it would cause those trees, because it's technically gas, when it was lit, to catch on fire, okay? So this is an herbicide. It was meant to clear out all the trees, because if you look through, there's a picture at the very back of this last slide that I want you to look at if you're following along with the PowerPoint, and it will show you a picture of this. The intent was to clear away the trees because Vietnam is basically jungle, okay, really, really thick brush and jungle, and we're going to see when we look at the North Vietnamese wartime strategy is that they use these trees and these jungles to their advantage. It's really hard to fight in these jungles, and so the United States decides we got to clear out these trees. And so the most efficient way to do that is through the air, dropping these chemicals. Now, what the United States knows but won't openly talk about is that this is a developing country. They don't have a high level of urbanization, so it's not like the jungles are empty and all the people live in the cities, right? This is a developing nation, a third world country, meaning there are lots of people living in small villages scattered throughout the jungle. So when napalm comes down and the trees get cleared away, those fires and just those chemical weapons, they destroy whole villages and people along with it. Okay, so that's the first chemical weapon that we use. The second one is very similar. It's called Agent Orange. This one is another herbicide, but it's more of a gas rather than a like a jelly gasoline. It's more of like your gas form that you typically see. And so I don't think I have a picture in the PowerPoint, but if you look it up, you know what it is, because again, they'd have the airplanes overhead, and then you would have this orange gas that was disseminated out of it, and hence the name Agent Orange. And again, this was meant to kind of clear away all of those forests. But again, you have people living in the forest, which is super problematic, and then you have all of these cancers and birth defects, a lot of the same kind of stuff that we see after the atomic bombs, right, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all that radiation sickness. You see similar effects on people who were exposed to Agent Orange as well. So even though the Americans wanted to use it for purely military strategy, clearing out the trees, it also has a large human impact as well. Okay, so that's the second method that the U.S. is using. So we have airstrikes, we have chemical weapons to clear out the trees, and then third, and probably the most controversial over time, is the use of soldiers, of U.S. ground troops. We sent millions of people to Vietnam over the course of 1964 to 1973. So in about a 10-year period, we're talking about 2 million troops serving in Vietnam. It's a very high number for a U.S. war, especially since we're fighting it in really just half of an already small country. I mean, we're just smothering it with troops, and we're going to see why we send so many people over to Vietnam in a second as we talk about the Viet Cong, or the North Vietnamese strategy for winning the war. Okay, now again, this is a small developing country. They just got their independence in the 50s. Okay, so they are, new and improved. Ho Chi Minh, the communist revolutionary, he knows he doesn't stand a chance against the United States. Like, if it's us versus them, the United States is going to win every single time because we have the manpower, we have the technology, we have the money. Okay, and so Ho Chi Minh, he knows this, and so his strategy is just to wear us down. He says, "Listen, we can't, launch some big offensive and win. We're not going to outnumber them. We're not going to, outgun them. We're not going to outspend them, but we are going to outlast them." Okay, and we've seen this before. The United States kind of did this in the Revolutionary War, right? We were the underdogs in that, but what caused us to win? It was our home turf. We knew the land. We were motivated, and we just wanted to outlast the British, right? And we were successful. And we're going to see that Ho Chi Minh has the right idea by doing this. So he thinks if we can just wear down the Americans, eventually they're not going to want to fight anymore. morale is going to wane. We're going to keep catching them off balance, and kind of use our land, our familiarity with the land to our advantage, and we'll win, okay, in the long run. But it's going to be kind of an all-out war of attrition. Okay, so that's Ho Chi Minh's strategy. And what kind of goes hand in hand with this, and we've seen this in the past too, in wars that we've talked about that the United States has fought, is that Ho Chi Minh is going to use specifically guerrilla warfare against the United States. So he is going to use kind of the element of surprise to his advantage, and he's going to use, again, that his home turf, the familiarity with the land, in order to, guerrilla warfare, to kind of keep America off balance. Okay, so they would have booby traps all over the jungles. Okay, the bombs, landmines. The Viet Cong, they would hide all day in tunnels that they would build, or up in the trees, or in caves behind rocks. I mean, they would just sit there all day long, because they preferred to fight at night. Okay, just when you're, thinking that you can go to sleep and kind of be off your guard a little bit, relax. All of a sudden, this attack would start, and you're not in your home turf. You're kind of caught off guard. It's really dark. You can't really see. That element of surprise, it causes stress to mount over time. So American soldiers can never really relax, because you would just never know where the Viet Cong was, when they were waiting to strike, how they were going to do that. So that element of surprise and guerrilla warfare, using the land to their advantage, it really works for the Viet Cong. And this is why, again, Americans decide that we're going to use these types of herbicides, Agent Orange, napalm, because if they can clear out the trees, they're at least eliminating one of those hiding spots and making it easier to fight this war, because the jungles were used to the Viet Cong's advantage. Okay, we also see similar use of like child soldiers, armed civilians, some of the things that we talked about when we did World War II, and kind of what would have happened in the event of a land invasion in Japan, how they were arming civilians. Same thing happened in Vietnam. And again, this is all just meant to keep Americans kind of off their guard. You don't even know who your enemy is, right? You go into what you think is a friendly village that's going to house you and kind of help you along your way through the country, and all of a sudden these kids come out to greet you, and they have candy in their hand, but bomb is strapped to their chest. That stuff happened all the time. And so imagine if you're a US soldier fighting over in Vietnam, you literally can never relax. And so that's why, part of the reason why, there's a lot of reasons, but the Vietnam War, the soldiers that fought that war have a very high rate of PTSD. It's really hard for a lot of soldiers to talk about their experiences in Vietnam, because of the level of stress that was incurred while they were there. And a lot of that stress, again, is because of the Viet Cong's fighting tactics. So very successful against the United States. So much so that despite the US's best effort, I mean, thinking about, again, how many bombs we're sending over there, how many troops we're sending over there, we're using chemical weapons, despite all of those best efforts and increasing efforts over time, the Viet Cong just won't surrender. I mean, they are in it for the long haul. And so the United States is forced to just send over, again, more bombs and more troops. And it's just not effective, right? They're fighting at night. They're not fighting in an area that they are comfortable in. Again, you have stress that is mounting. The Viet Cong know that they just need to hang on. They are determined. And so all of a sudden by 1967, about 3 or 4 years into the war, it's become a stalemate, meaning that neither side is able to advance and have a real clear victory. I mean, you might have, one victory in one battle, but because it's fought with guerrilla warfare, you're just never quite sure who is winning, right? You might have one great battle here, but you've lost the last 3, and you don't even really know how to classify what is a battle and what's not, because it's really just these surprise attacks coming sporadically from the jungle and from different civilian villages. So it's hard to keep track of who's winning, who's losing, who has the advantage. And so by, again, 1967, this thing is a stalemate, okay? Now, what effect does this have at home? Because we're looking at the home front too, okay? By the time the war becomes a stalemate in 1967, you have Americans who start just questioning this, right? This is the 1960s as well. Think about all the things that they're questioning. They're questioning, human rights and, what rights we give people with the civil rights movement and a lot of the 1960s reforms that you looked at. They're questioning reproductive rights, right, with Roe v. Wade and women's right to choose. They are questioning marriage, right, the LGBTQ movement. So there's just a lot of questions in the 1960s, and this is another one of those questions, is Should we be fighting this war, right? Do we believe President Johnson when he says that we can win? Do we believe him in his motivations, that they are true and that they're honest, right? Is his strategy working? Is Americanizing this war really the way to go? And so Americans start questioning it. Now, what makes this even worse is that, again, he needs troops. We're just sending over so many troops. By 1965, people are questioning the war so much that they stop enlisting. And so you know what that means. Johnson initiates a draft. Okay, now we've had drafts before, but this one is a tricky one. Okay, in the 1950s, we talked about the GI Bill and how more people are going to college. Okay, so college enrollment is on the rise. So LBJ, he doesn't want to stop that. So he basically says, listen, if you are in college, then you can get out of the war. Okay, you don't have to be drafted. That's kind of a loophole. Now, what does this actually mean? It means if you're educated and can afford college, if you're from a wealthy family, meaning like a business, you own a business, or you come from old money, or you're from a politician's family, then you can get out of the draft. And so this becomes what they call a poor man's war, right? If you're working class, you can't afford college, you don't come from one of these wealthy, influential families, then you have to go fight LBJ's war. And so that adds fuel to the anti-war movement, okay? Because not only are people questioning the war, now it seems like only the poor people have to fight it, okay? And so all of this discontentment, it leads to our 1960s and 70s anti-war movement, okay? Now this anti-war movement, it starts largely on college campuses, okay? And a lot of the college campuses that it starts on are here in the Bay Area, okay? For instance, UC Berkeley is kind of one of the birthplaces of the anti-war movement. Michigan, though, also plays a big role. The University of Michigan. It starts on college campuses. Why? Because these are the kids, that age group, that are being drafted. Okay, they are the ones who have to go and fight this war, and so they are the ones that start the anti-war movement. From there, it spreads to other parts of the country. How does it spread? Through television. Okay, Vietnam is being televised. You see the battles taking place. You see the body bags coming home, all of the coffins. You see the nature of the fighting on television every night because you have wartime correspondents over there filming. But you also see the anti-war protests taking place throughout the United States on television. And so the role of TV cannot be underestimated. Like, as Americans see what's happening in Vietnam and they see the reaction of people in the colleges, more and more people join the movement. So it's not just college students anymore. You have people across the country who join the anti-war movement, and it picks up steam that way. Okay, so TV and the reality of death and the war and stalemate, it just kind of feeds and fuels this anti-war movement. Okay, what really is, though, kind of like the turning point, if we're looking for a major turning point in all of this, even though stalemate and the anti-war movement is kind of a turning point, the real turning point that kind of forces the government to start making hard decisions is something called the Tet Offensive. Okay, by 1968, the Viet Cong, they're feeling good. Okay, Ho Chi Minh kind of knows, like, we are getting close. Okay, if we just keep going and don't let up on the gas, the United States is going to eventually give up, and we can make some headway because the anti-war movement had already started, and everybody knew that morale was waning in the United States. Okay, and so Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong, they plan something called the Tet Offensive. It's going to be a major offensive where they're basically going to target 5 major cities, 36 different targets, one of them being the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. And so all these like major targets, you're going to have all of these simultaneous attacks at the same time, hoping that that's going to force the South Vietnamese to basically abandon the United States once they realize that the North Vietnamese could actually win this, and then they can reunite the country. So that's the end goal, is to basically show the South Vietnamese, not the U.S., the South Vietnamese, that the Viet Cong are winning this, get them abandon the U.S. alliance, and then the U.S. will have to leave. They'll be forced to leave. Okay, that's the goal. Now, the United States obviously doesn't want this to happen, and so we fight back on the Tet Offensive, like, just a lot. I mean, we're pretty successful. They don't reach all of their targets. The objective of the Tet Offensive is never actually realized. But what's significant about this is that it gets American military leaders realizing, kind of once and for all, okay, they're never going to give up, right? Like, the Tet Offensive is massive. And yes, we starve them off for now, but they know they're just going to make another one, and they're going to come back, in a couple of months, and they're going to launch another attack and another attack. This is the Tet Offensive. It's a turning point because this is when American military leaders realize they aren't giving up. And the support of the United States is, okay? And so basically the military leaders, they meet with President Johnson and they say, we need to do something. And they recommend to the president that they start negotiating a peace with Ho Chi Minh, find a way to bring this war to a close on similar or compromising terms so that we don't come out as the overall losers in this thing by waiting, okay? So March 1968, LBJ gets again on TV and announces to the public that he is going to, over time, decrease the number of troops that he's sending over to Vietnam, and he is going to seek a peace settlement with the Viet Cong. Now, it's still going to take a long time until we get there, but the Tet Offensive is that turning point, because this is when America starts to realize, okay, we're not fighting to win. We are now trying to just find a situation, a way we can get out of this war and still look ourselves in the mirror and feel like, you know, we accomplished something. We're looking for something other than a total defeat here, okay? This is also when LBJ takes the opportunity. He says, you know, he says all this, but he also takes the opportunity to say, yeah, I know I'm up for re-election next year, but I'm not. I'm out of here. I've served my term. I took over for Kennedy. I you know, did his last couple years. I've done my 4. I'm not going to seek re-election for a second term. And that's because, I mean, think of all the stuff that this man has been through. He basically inherited the rest of Kennedy's presidency, and he had to deal with a country who was grieving a president. He tried to realize Kennedy's legacy, right? The war on poverty. He fought for Kennedy's policies. He also helps pass major civil rights legislation, and so he's dealing with the backlash of the civil rights movement, and now he's got Vietnam, and so he's basically just, he's waving his white flag, and he's done at that point. And so Nixon, we're going to see, is who takes over for him, and Nixon's the one who sees the end of the Vietnam War. So today I have kind of a fun activity for you guys. You are listening to some anti-war music from the 1960s and 70s, my favorite activities all year. Mr. Runyon hates it because he can hear, rock music playing from my room, across the wall, but I just love it. Anyways, have fun listening to it in your room. You probably know a bunch of the songs. The lyrics are in your drive folder, so you can follow along. Your assignment basically is to listen to the songs and then write me a couple sentences about how they express anti-war sentiments, like we've talked about in this lecture. So you're going to hear references to the bombs. You're going to hear references to LBJ and his involvement. You're going to hear references to the draft. So keep this lecture in mind as you listen to those songs and kind of make those connections. And if you have questions, let me know. I miss you. I love you so much. Wash your hands. I'll see you soon.